Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is my third 8.5 by 11 full-size letter size scene done in this last few days. I'm kind of getting hooked on this ratio and format here and the area that you can utilize within the space. And for me to see what different combinations of stamps can do with one another and what type of space this, what imagery the space can handle without getting kind of overly busy and whatnot. I have a lot of things going in this scene right here, but I think it doesn't look overly busy. It's certainly, if I kind of zoom in and take a look at, some of these areas in here, there is a lot of things going on in terms of the number of stamps used, but when we look at the pieces, as an overall, I think things can look fairly cohesive and not overly worked, I guess you can say. So I had a lot of fun with this one and the previous two. That's why I did this one. I wasn't going to do a third, but I thought my previous two compositions looked like they could be viewed together. But I need a third to make a full triptych, so I don't know if I'm going to display these. I probably won't, but just in terms of the ability to be able to do it, I think is kind of fun. So anyways, the theme is kind of bold silhouettes, so that's where these the birds, the subject matters, come into play. And this one isn't screaming and intense, of a color scheme or whatnot, with the things that are going on. But hopefully, in its serenity and whatnot, it can, it conveys a sort of, kind of a subdued drama of a kind of a wetlands scene here. So, anyways, hope you enjoy the scene. If you choose to watch it, it's a big one, so it's long, but there's always the toggle bar, kind of going through the piece, and you can just kind of skip ahead to any part of the process that you want to. So thanks again for tuning into the channel, and I hope you enjoy... I don't have a title for this one. I'll have to think about that. Hope you enjoy the scene. Okay, I thought I had one 8.5 by 11 sized piece for the week left in me, and I thought I would do the third in kind of what's become a series of pieces that can work in conjunction with one another, kind of like a triptych. I usually don't work on the size here, but I don't know, after the first two I thought, they look pretty good together, as far as being able to be displayed together in kind of a cohesive manner. And as far as kind of the format goes, both kind of visually and in a narrative standpoint, or from a narrative standpoint. So I thought I would do one more this week. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me here. I don't know where this one's going. Like I said in my previous videos, I don't work on this size, so I usually don't do the same compositions too many times. I don't even know if I do them twice a lot of times, but because I like to move on, I like to try different compositions and whatnot, but especially at this kind of format, the size, I haven't worked out too many kind of foundational compositions at this point in time. Okay, that was the Eerie moon, and I'm working in some of this cloud space here, spooky cloud, dark, this is called. I'm not really worried about kind of the imagery from this. What I'm doing is I'm getting some texture that will be underneath another cloud, okay? So I'm just kind of filling in here and there, and not even worried about it from a cohesive standpoint. because there really won't be kind of a cohesion to it yet. Okay. I just have kind of a rough idea of kind of the visual narrative that'll be in here, and we'll see how it kind of develops. But the kind of foundational idea is this will be kind of a wetlands, okay? And I'm thinking about this moon up here, and how I like that look of a moon when you see kind of this corona around it. But I'm not going to do that ring around it like what you would see out in nature, but I'll have kind of this bank of clouds that will have a kind of a circular style of illumination, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, so on the cloud cumulus, I've inked it up with the same color that I did in this one, a very dark blue, kind of a navy blue. Dark navy blue, that one in particular is called Prussian blue, but what I've done is I've wiped off a lot of this darker edge up here, okay, and I'll kind of run this part of it into this design right in there. If it doesn't go perfectly, that'd be fine. Okay, so it looks something like that. So hopefully it'll be a nice, very layered sky that we're looking at here. And all the lighting and, you know, the continuity and so forth will come about through the coloring process. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not worried about kind of how it looks at this point in time, because everything kind of develops over time, and we have a lot of time to work all that type of aspect of it out. Okay, so you can see where I'm going over that dark cloud. I mean, I didn't need to put that dark cloud in there. That's the name of that stamp. It wasn't real dark, but you know, I stamped it in a light color. But I just want a little bit of variation, kind of inherent in the design. I mean, you can almost put anything. I could have used, you know, water pattern up there or something like that. Okay, but every time I ink this up and I make my imprints of it, I always have these billows kind of facing in towards my light source, okay? So if it's underneath, it's like this, top lit. If it's over the top of the moon, I flip it over and it's bottom lit, okay? Over here to the right of the moon, I'll angle it in like so. Okay. And let's continue this out. Now when it moves out to the perimeter, I'm not going to bother wiping it off, but I will re-ink in between my impressions, okay? Change the angle and overlap quite considerably, okay? Don't overlap the previous impression by 90%, but, you know, up to 50%, I would say. And you don't have to measure it off or anything like that. But just in general, okay? I'm going for drama in this piece from a thematic standpoint. Okay, now I am wiping off the bottom of this a little bit. I'll have it transition down here into some wetlands area. And that's the point, that's the part of it that I really don't know where I'm kind of going with that. But we'll see. I do have some imagery that I pulled out that will work with that idea just fine. But we'll see. Okay. So we've made a lot of impressions. One of the best things about the genre of scenic stamping is the amount of repetition you can use with any given image. It, you know, can really go a long way. So I didn't count it. Was that maybe, I don't know, a dozen impressions with that one cloud? all made into a continuous, seamless sky from edge to edge. All right? Okay, now let's start to think about some layering in here in terms of the imagery. I want to make this a pretty full wetlands. This has some pine trees in the background. I'm not sure if I'm going to use that. There's some rocks and leaves here. I do think that the sedge fillers, sedge cluster, I'm sorry, will work really well. In the spirit here, I might do quite a lot of this right here, as well as the larger version. But I just want this to be really full, okay? And it's going to be a very dark scene because this is night, and I'm going to be using a lot of silhouette imagery, so let's just stamp these out in black here. I want them to be nice and dark and to really stand up against all the tones that I'm going to be running into the scene. Okay, so anyway, I think I need a little bit more black ink on my re-inker. On my pad with the re-inker, sorry. Alright, this is the sedge cluster large here. Okay, and maybe go for a couple impressions of it. Just overlap, changing the height of it a little bit for some variation. Okay, you can see how that just kind of blends it with one another. Go for another one right here, maybe. So we try to take the kind of guesswork out of the seamless aspect of these stamps here. I'm using the smaller one just for a little bit of variation here. Try to take all the guesswork out of, or the tedium, I guess maybe is more accurate, out of the placement of your imagery for the seamless aspect of it. Okay, those were sedge clusters. This one's called sedge fillers, so I'm just kind of creating kind of a top cap here area for that grass area. Okay, so it's kind of filling in like so. And let's see, let's go with the smaller one. Kind of here in the a little bit more distant. It's not really far, but do something like that. Kind of this meandering kind of inlet right here. Something like that. And let's see, do I want another one over here? Kind of maybe working in threes. I do have some of my grassy banks and whatnot too. I might want to use some of that. I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe. This is where I don't know where I'm going with it, and I might be using some stamps in ways that I haven't used them before. So, just because I, have the opportunity with so much space to work with. Okay, here's the sedge cluster, and I'm kind of wiping off the top portion because I'm going to use something else right over the top of it. I mean, I could use just that sedge filler again too, but let's use a bit of this other stamp. Should be Grassy Bluffs. Okay, that would be there. Okay, so it'll be that side of it. Okay, I'm just making it like so. Okay. clear out some space as I do this. I'm throwing all these stamps in one box here. Sometimes as I'm doing these videos, I'm just kind of putting my stamps back into, not inventory, but just on the floor with a bunch of stamps ready to be cleaned off, and sometimes by the end of the scene I kind of forget which stamps I used, you know, for the notation and doing all these videos. Okay, let's see. So we have this little space in the background. So what we're looking at right here is kind of close, middle ground, a little bit farther away, and farthest away, maybe do kind of more of a silhouette type of background where kind of land meets sky, maybe. Let's see, do I want to use that? I guess that'll be fine. I'm trying to figure out which one of these I want to do. I have several of these island stamps now, and I guess that'll be good. I'm just trying to decide on what size do I want to use. I have several sizes, but we'll go with the larger one. Alright, I'm going to have to use this on a diagonal just so it fits this mount. I do have a larger mount, but let's just go with this one right here. I'm using tack and peel on my acrylic block for my temporary mounting of my bare rubber stamps. If you're curious about that, it's by Tsukaneko, and I don't carry it, but you can find it online. I should, because everyone asks me about it when they see it, especially at conventions. Okay, I'm going to mask off this kind of little grassy mound here, and we'll go about like so. Doesn't have to be perfect by any means. And if you think that I'm really placing things really carefully and expertly, well, I guess you can say that, but I just kind of go with whatever happens in a given composition. I'm not, you know, strategically placing things out. And yeah, I have a lot of experience using these, of course, but I don't know. When I'm looking at this, you know, if I had to assess it at this point in time, like with most of my scenes, I think it looks, I don't know, it looks like a hot mess here, you know. But I just know that when you start bringing in your tones, and it's not usually the first or second one, especially on this kind of glossy cardstock kind of process right here, it doesn't look, you know, kind of like a cohesive type of statement to me at all at this point in time. And a lot of times I'm just kind of wondering where it's kind of going during that process. I mean, for a while, I don't necessarily know if something's going to turn out or not. All right, now see, I'm assessing right here. What size of trees or whatever is placed on this will kind of make a statement as to how far away that is. So if I put this kind of island, pine island, right here, I mean, these could be smaller trees or something like that, but I think it would kind of push things back in the distance because they are so small and we don't see some larger ones up here. So I don't know if I think I want to bring things a little bit closer to us, maybe with some taller trees here, saying that this space is a little bit more compressed. But I don't know. I'm still kind of working it out here. Here's some pines right here, or I can put these pines right in here too. Do I want these ones? And for these ones to be the largest ones? I'm not sure. I could. But, I don't know. These ones in the background aren't bad, though. So I might want to do that. Still assessing. Okay. And then I have this one right here. I do like this. I can use this in the foreground. I go to this place called Lake Hodges, hiking once in a while, and seasonally there's this, when it's kind of in a drought year or whatever, when there's not a lot of rain for several years, trees start growing into this one area. Then when there's a lot of rain, some years it kind of floods out, and these trees are in the bushes are in the water, and they just kind of dry out, and kind of are skeletal trees standing out in the water. I do like these trees right back in here, though. I think that looks pretty good around that moon. All right, let's just go ahead and do it. When you're doing these types of compositions, it's not really a matter of kind of making a mistake or so. Oh, I shouldn't have used that stamp right there. It's just, I don't know. It's just different. There's just different choices. You can choose to use one over another. You can choose to, put nothing at all in a given space. And it's just kind of all what you end up doing with it, too, after you stamp it out. And kind of just going from there. Alright, now I'm stamping on a big fat mound of paper towels. I have like a double layer there, so I'm going to put a little bit more pressure around that mask on the bottom of this. But you don't need careful masking or anything like that either. I mean, I definitely don't want, 2 inches between the top of this tree and, the bottom, where it meets these, this island right here, okay? I don't want it not stamped, from there, but just in general, if it doesn't stamp in a certain portion of it or enough, you're going to bring in some color into it anyway in the coloring process. So again, it's not really something that's that really I get too concerned with if I don't get it perfectly kind of matched up. And it almost never is perfectly matched up. And again, because I don't really care about that aspect of it. Okay, so anyway, here are these trees kind of back on that ridge line, but see this little ridge right in here? This foreground one? Let's put a tree right behind this and put it right in this place right here, so it's a little bit, you have some farther back and some a little bit closer, okay? So we'll just mask out this front one, and I'll see this? I'm using a smaller portion of it like this. Might be subconscious that I was looking at someone's scene that posted in the Facebook group, and they use these trees, and then I think about it. I wasn't even thinking about it just till now, and I just remembered. Oh yeah, they used it with this grassy bluff, and it looked really good. Okay. Let's add some more. Let's just keep doing it the same way. Okay. You put something really dark next to your light source, like a moon or a sun or whatever, trees, and it really brings kind of a more of a dramatic feel to that area, because you have something dark next to something so light, so they kind of play off each other. You get something, this contrast, dark against light, and the light makes the dark seem even darker, and the dark makes the light even seem lighter by contrast. Okay, so adding it down like so. I missed a little bit here. See, it didn't stamp down there. But, I mean, I could put another one in there, but, I don't know. Well, let's just do that. I didn't have to, though. Do something like that. Okay. it still looks pretty sloppy to me, but you know, all the colors and tones all, you know, have yet to be stamped, so I have confidence that that will bring it all together. But I don't know for sure, though. But I'm not worried about it, because I don't know, it usually does. Okay, I'm putting this one right here. I'm putting this tree on this kind of near little tuft. Would it be there? I don't know. You know, if this is a wetlands, they're usually more seasonal, but from a compositional standpoint, I really like those trees right there. Okay, now I'm going to do all my, really the fun thing that that's going to be happening in here is with all the birds and things like that that I'm going to introduce in the scene. But I'm going to add those in later, because I want to kind of build all of this out first from a lighting perspective and well, I guess that color perspective too, lighting and color. So, all right, let's see, I have some other stamps too that I might be running in here kind of later on, but let's just do this right now. Okay, so again, just as in the last two scenes that I've done, we have a lot of space here to fill in. And we're talking about a lot of ink when we're talking about a real saturated 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So I just find it easier just to go with a re-inker. And within the color scheme that you're working in, I just go with the lightest color and I'll use a re-inker for it. You don't have to. I mean, a lot of my scenes I don't. But on the quarter, I used my wrong tip right here. That one had ink on it already, like a brown ink. It's just, this makes things a lot faster and easier to do, I would say, when you just use that re-inker. I switched over to kind of a thicker ink from just all Marvies at one point in time. Not as an alternative, but in addition to, and anything from Ranger, Memento, any of those inks are really kind of thick in viscosity, so they kind of really spread around for you. But they spread much easier the more ink you have on your applicator, be it whatever that might be. This one here is a Colorbox stylus tool. It's just sponge on a stick, basically. You call it, I think they call these handles or something. But now, see, this is a really light tone that I'm working with to start off with. Okay, and when I'm doing this, I'm establishing kind of my light and dark areas. Okay, now I'm smearing some of my freshly stamped black because I just re-inked my black, but this scene is going to get pretty dark anyway, so some of this does merge with some of that black ink and smears it a little bit. That's fine. That's why I'm kind of waiting to stamp my subject matter in the end. Just, I don't want my subject matter smearing, but if some of these trees smear a little bit, that's fine. Okay, so scenic lighting, okay. It does matter from a light source perspective what you retain, as far as the lightness, but it's as far as the reflected light within your scene, okay. So as light source, I'm not going to color out, okay. I might put a little bit of tone over the top of it if it's just too stark white, like a little streak of some blue like this, some lightest color. But as far as some of this reflected light, I'm going to keep some of that reflected light on my clouds present. Okay, so just in general, I like to make areas kind of farther away from my light source, a little bit darker. So on the perimeter, you can see I'm adding some of this tone. But just on some of these clouds right in here, I'm going to leave it the white of the page, practically. I might put a little bit of a kind of a drier application of this ink on it. Okay, so it's like that there. It's really kind of light and dull. Okay, so see this right around here, kind of around the perimeter here. I'm adding some of it, and then it kind of directs your viewer's eye there. I mean, I'm still in a very light color here, so it's not doing a lot of, directing of the eye right now because it's just so light, but it's a start, and with my lightest colors, those tend to be the ones that I'm kind of establishing my lighting scheme with. Okay, so where do you put shadows here? If the light is coming from back here, then when you have different types of objects on the front side of them, that's where the shadows will be, okay? Because it's, the scene is being backlit. So we have this island right here, so at the base of this island I'll put a little bit of color, or a lot of it, painting down a lot of that ink. Okay, so on here we have these little tufts of grass, sedge, okay? So I'm putting some down here. Now on my water, I might want to leave some of that nice and white, like it's reflecting some of that light, like shimmering water in the moonlight. Put a little bit because I have a lot more colors to go, okay? So this tree right here, right at the base of the tree, I'll add some tone. At the base of these trees, I'll add some tone. Around here. Sometimes the process is real easy. This is glossy cardstock, but if you just kind of squeeze some of that ink out and just kind of drag it in, it's like dragging out a nice big puddle of ink. And it spreads really easy for you, so you're not kind of struggling with kind of applying a wet applicator onto a dry sheet where the paper is absorbing and the ink's drying real fast, and it's kind of a clunkier process, but if you use enough ink, it makes it into a really easy process. And that's one of the things I started doing in my workshops. I just put a little puddle of ink like that on everyone's work area for their first color scheme that they were doing, and we'd all do blue color schemes together as a class. And when I had them start off with this, this re-inker fluid, they couldn't help but use a lot of that ink because you got a big puddle of it on your applicators, and it got everyone to use the right amount of ink, which is a lot, okay? So they weren't just coloring, they were kind of saturating their page with ink. And when you kind of achieve that super saturation with your first color, it makes all of the other colors that much easier to blend into the scene, okay? Because the page is kind of wet, so even if you're going with a very thick style of ink or any color of ink, it just makes it so much easier to blend in, You won't get harsh oval shapes anywhere, okay? Or if you do, they just blend right out. Okay, so this is I want this to be a fairly somber kind of color scheme. It's going to be kind of muted in some ways. I want this to be a really deep night type of scene. Okay, so anyway, see here, I'm keeping, some of the white on some of these little clusters here and there. It doesn't matter really too much about where you kind of oscillate the light and dark, just as long as there is some oscillation of light and dark in there, where there's variation. That's the most important thing. Okay. That was as dark as that aqua will go, okay? So I'm going to switch up now and move into my next darkest tone, which would be... I'm looking for my salvia blue. I don't see my salvia blue pad. Let me pause right here and see if I have it See if that was one of the ones that kind of... Oh, no, I have them right here. Okay. Hopefully they're well inked. Okay, I'm starting to get a gigantic pile of things on my desk from working on those two big scenes. Okay, the salvia blue is going to be a little bit darker. If you don't have that, then just move to your next darker tone of blue. Okay, try not to go from something that's so light to like something like that Prussian blue or a navy blue. If you have kind of an intermediate blue or something like that, the Memento Bahama blue or something, try moving into that. Try to move as incremental as you can through your value schemes, okay, when doing this type of thing. And okay, if you have to make quite a large leap from one value to the next. Remember, don't be brands specific, be kind of more value and color specific here. So mix and match your pads with other brands. But kind of moving incrementally makes the whole process kind of move a lot slower, okay? But your scenes become much richer from having all those different layers of hue built up on your piece, all these different values. You kind of have to get used to it a little bit, you know. It's like moving around a lot of ink. It's kind of like moving around a puddle. A lot of you have had experience with it. It's with a different media, but alcohol inks are really similar. You can kind of lay them down. And dye-based inks aren't so much like that, but the spirit of it is what I'm talking about. It's kind of, you can kind of move things around a little bit. I can move them around while things are still wet too. Okay, so what I'm talking about is if I squeeze a bunch of this ink right there, I can kind of really move it around, and I see, you know, where I've added a lot of it. If I press too hard with this, it just kind of wipes right off and gets lighter, okay? So then how dark it is, but I just wipe like that, it wiped right off. So it's kind of, you have to kind of, you know, it's kind of the manipulation of kind of these wet particles of ink on your surface. Unlike where, you know, like alcohol inks will go back into solution physically, you know, they'll, you know, reconstitute if you kind of use a blender or something like that on it. But the spirit is kind of the same, you know, you can kind of move things around a little bit. With dye-based inks, so you can just kind of move it around a little bit, you know, temporarily until it kind of sets up and dries. Then it's pretty well set. You can't like add water to it and it'll get lighter. It's pretty much stained the paper. Okay, but now this second color, as I go in here, I'm kind of adding this roughly in the same places that I did with the previous color. So the previous color did the establishing kind of marks, you know, applications of shadows. So I'm just kind of following suit with this next one because this next color isn't so dark. I pretty much added almost the same areas as the previous color, which didn't make that previous color kind of a wasted exercise, okay? It's still visible because as you add your dye-based inks over one another, dye-based inks are transparent, so that's where you'll get the depth. You'll get one hue showing, you know, through another, you know, the application of another color. Okay, see how this is quite a bit darker there? So you just kind of spread it around, still adding it, kind of the base of this, you know, little area back in here. Right here, add those shadows in. Really basically a cool color scheme, but I might want to add a little bit of warmth here and there. But we'll see how it goes through the these blues here. Sometimes I'm just going with only blue. Might leave the scene, you know, fairly rich with blue, but kind of limited in terms of the temperature scheme, where I like to add in, you know, more of something. or temperature, you know, just in a small area, just to give a, you know, stronger variation to that aspect of color, you know, which is temperature. See, right along the base of this, I'm kind of adding some of this in, move it around a little bit. This thing is, you know, this cluster here is casting a shadow, so I'll add it right around the base of that. I like to add these streaky types of touches to my water areas, so what I do is I hold this at an angle like this, and I'll kind of streak it in like so. I will use the whole thing of it, you know, for coverage, but for texture, I'll use the side of it like that. I'll get these little kind of striations here, going across like that. Just kind of adds up to a more kind of varied textural statement. All right, so, and trust me, when we're doing this too, I mean, it might seem like a lot of ink and a lot of coverage for, you know, just two colors so far, but when we move up into our darker tones, we're not using as much of them, so it goes much faster when you move to those darker tones. Darker tones tend to be a little more perimeter and kind of detail-oriented, so you just don't add as much. So it's not like, you know, we're going to take forever with, you know, Prussian blue in the toning process. See that kind of lighting scheme starting to develop a little bit more. And we have a lot more imagery that we'll be using in here too, so don't worry about this area down here. It's very kind of underdeveloped, to say the least, right now, but we'll develop it. Okay, so I don't just color, you know, with, you know, these types of base coats of ink. I'm kind of saturating too. If it can get darker using existing ink, then just keep adding more. As soon as it's not really getting any darker, though, that's when you know you can move up to your next color. But kind of saturate, like I said, pretty good. And when we saturate like that, we'll get a nice glowing kind of overall appearance in the end result. Okay. All right, coming around. Let me see. Let me check out that Bahama blue here. I was talking about the Memento Bahama blue. That one's a pretty good one for this color scheme. All the inks are really good, but let's just go ahead and use this one. I think this Bahama blue is somewhere in between the Salvia blue that I just applied and the next color, which will be the Marvy. Okay, so you can see, get a good feel for it, or get a little bit of a feel for it. See, you know, how it's going to change the overall look of a given area that you're applying it in. So just kind of test it out, test out how dark it is, test out how kind of intense it is, and more importantly, test out kind of how it looks over the top of your, you know, in this case, the two previous colors. It never looks like the color that it is, you know, especially except for that first color that we applied in there, because we're applying it over the top of all these other tones that we've already laid down. So things are pretty saturated right now. Okay. Remember, at some point in time, you're going to want to kind of apply your inks a little bit more deliberately and carefully, because we don't want to lose all of that lighting that we've established in there. And in the darker tones, that's where someone often loses it. They just color in the whole thing. the lightest tones, you know, if you come in here at a certain point in time after applying your tones and you come in here and tap around with it, it's almost invisible when you're starting with such a light color. But remember, when you're starting off with a much darker color, less of the ink is transferring to the paper, so that you have this remains moist for a longer period of time because you've achieved kind of a super saturation in here. But when you go with a darker tone, you know, it's going to be darker to begin with, and like I said, there's more ink on here, so sometimes if they go in here like this, like tap it around like this with the first color, and then they come in here, it's almost invisible. But you know, when you move up in your third color or so, there's quite a few in there, so if you kind of move in here at the same rate, okay, you might end up with a lot of shapes in there. So that being said, you just kind of stay on the edge a little bit longer, okay, with one inking before you kind of start taking it in here, okay, so that you get a nice transition from wet to dry and dark to light. Okay, so that looks pretty good up there with that Bahama blue. Let's hit this area down here and hit it in those shadow areas, so we're building out the shadows and, I don't know, just the darker areas within a given area, object, whatnot. You can see how the lighting is starting to become a little bit more apparent the darker you go, okay? So it wasn't real apparent with the first couple colors because they were so light. But it's when you start moving up in your darker tones, does that lighting scheme that you've established become much more kind of prominent and visible. Memento inks are inherently very thick in viscosity, so they blend very nicely. You know, I can get a puddle like that going and see, it just blends right out, right? And again, that's because I used enough of that first ink, so be generous with your first couple colors, your base layer colors, so that if I do, you know, get some kind of unintentional and undesired mark within, you know, given area or space, you know, within a part of your scene, it'll just blend right out and blend into your, you know, your shading. Okay. Now, if things are kind of feeling like it's kind of grabbing on your tip right here, and you're not getting that kind of nice, smoother style of color application because of you're fighting the medium, then just go back in with your lighter colors again and just add that right over the top of this, okay? If I'm out in Arizona during the summertime and it's really arid and hot, this ink might be drying on this paper faster, okay? So maybe you just use more of your reinker fluid to begin with, or by the time you get to this, then you just apply another reinker fluid application over the top of this to kind of get it moist again, and just go back to the color that you know, you were currently on. By putting a lighter color of ink over the top of this darker color, it's not going to make the darker colors lighter, okay? You're just kind of re-lubricating the page. Okay, but see how, I don't know, I mean, everything's starting to come together kind of from a cohesion standpoint. I mean, not quite yet, but, you know, having these common colors is kind of one step in that process. for shadows right in here. And you do not have to stay within the lines, okay? Staying within the lines, not conducive to the kind of the spirit of you know, the blending of imagery. Doesn't mean you can't go with, you know, this can't be green grass and this can't be blue. This is a nighttime scene though, so you probably wouldn't see too many colors like that, you know. You don't see temperature and different hue. But just in general, if you're doing other types of scenes, and I have plenty of scenes where, you know, there are changes of hue like that. But on those ones too, you don't have to stay within the lines. You just kind of, you know, you're merging imagery together, and kind of the presence of, you know, shared hue, you know, in this case it's blue, kind of brings everything together a little bit more. Alright, so kind of developing. Gonna hit this a little bit here. It's a little bit too bright, I think, or too light. Okay, alright. Memento, Bahama Blue. Great color. Alright, that's really similar to the Marvy number 10, which is called Light Blue. It's more of a medium blue, but they call it light. I don't know why. Maybe they came out with the lighter ones after this one, I don't know. Maybe they start off with, you know, 20 colors or something like that. Alright, it's a lot more intense of a blue, I can see, than the Memento. Applying this in roughly the same areas I did with the Memento, maybe a little bit less. Okay, kind of working around my light clouds, and still kind of retaining that lighter areas on my clouds. Okay, hit the shadows, and see how it's just a darker, brighter color. But the Memento served its purpose though, and will continue to, even underneath all these, or this other layer of ink that I'm laying down. And the Marvy is really spreading easy because of just how kind of wet this paper already is. So I'm doing that streak across like that in the water here, just, you know, to give it a little bit more that varied surface. Perimeter. Okay. All right, here's a dark blue, some Marvy blue. Kind of adding it around on the perimeter. The darker I take an area of my scene, the lighter the lightest areas will seem by contrast. Hitting it in the shadows. It's not as dark as one would think in comparison to what it would look like if I just only use this blue on a piece of white paper. It's because the colors are underneath, the lighter colors are showing through, and because the application of this ink, this blue, on this wet piece of paper, okay, it's like kind of creating a little bit of a vacuum at this point in time. When I apply this down, it's just the paper is just so moist. It's not absorbing and staining that paper very quickly. So I really have to kind of keep layering it down like that for it to kind of stick, or for it to show. And that's not a bad thing though, because it makes the process slower, and I'm able to be a lot more careful about my usage of this color. So in other words, okay, if I went like this right here, okay, it's a big, blob of ink, but see, I can really spread it around like that. Now don't do that, I just did that to make a point of how easy it can be to spread things around. But the thing that makes it easy, again, it's those lighter colors that I used as a foundation, okay? They allow me, they afford me the ability to kind of work in a very controlled, kind of methodical manner here. Now this goes much, much faster if I'm working on a full, a quarter-size piece of paper, standard card size, just because, I'm having to, apply so much coverage of ink onto my piece. And once again, there is something kind of nice about working in a different format, a larger format, or be it whatever format you're doing, because, for me, I just see compositions that I don't normally see, or color combinations that I don't see. But the compositions are kind of really fun for me to see from a usage standpoint, and how something will work with another, because on a quarter-size piece of paper, I can use, 10 different stamps. It's not going to be 10 main stamps or anything like that, but on something like this, it's not even the quantity of different stamps, it's how many, what certain stamps look like in conjunction with themselves, and in repetition, like the Sedge clusters. Or this island in the background, but it's not really an island in this case. It's just kind of the side of the, the water side. there. So, okay, so this is blue. It's a navy blue, but it's just called blue from Marvy. I think that's about that. That's about it with that color. Everything was kind of sloppy down here, looking, but when you bring in all of your tones and it kind of starts together, it kind of makes more sense from that point. You could have stamped this out, and I mean, you can use it, do something like this in chalks or colored pencils, or you can apply your tones using different types of applicators if you want to. If you're using something like chalks or pastels, you'd be doing this composition on, most likely on matte cardstock. Okay, now this is the Prussian blue that I used to stamp out my clouds. It's really fantastic dark blue ink. Prussian blue is a little bit different. The viscosity is thinner, so I do have to be kind of careful. I'm not going to squeeze out some of it like I did just to make a point with the previous color. Marvy colors are usually pretty consistent in terms of their consistency, but I think that Prussian blue is a little bit thinner, so it tends to stain too. Like whenever I use Prussian blue, my fingers tend to get real inky and stained with that blue ink. No big deal. Inky fingers. It's a good thing, you know. When we get inky fingers, it tends to, I think it tends to represent us having, that we, you know, just had a pretty good time with our, you know, supplies and whatever we were doing. But I do have to kind of scrub it off a little bit extra than with other types of ink or other colors, even within Marvy line. Prussian blue is a pretty good blue. It's a pretty dramatic blue. They don't sell Marvy pads anymore, dedicated pads, but they have the re-inkers for all the pads they used to have, and they sell blank pads too, so you can get a Prussian blue and a blank pad, and that will be your, can be a, you know, a very dark blue within your given ink repertoire. Okay, I've hit my shadows quite a bit here. I think it's starting to kind of take on that kind of mysterious moonlit. See, there's that kind of corona thing I was talking about. Not really, because it's just illuminated as clouds, but I think it has that kind of feel. All right. This is black. Just going back to the black. I haven't changed applicators either, so I'm just working with the same applicator through this entire process. So every time I change colors, the previous color is still in there to some degree, which makes it easier for me to blend in because it's kind of a combination between, you know, the two colors. Maybe I don't know, maybe two previous colors are still in there to some degree, so you know, you're kind of always kind of building things out very incrementally from a process standpoint, but I guess from a physical standpoint too, you know, where inks are physically kind of merging with one another on your applicator tip. So that right there, see the difference between this side and this side. This side has the black and this side not quite yet. This is where I'm really benefiting from having a pretty, you know, wet surface, because black is going to be the darkest color, and that's going to be the one that you really want to be able to spread around easily. But sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I get distracted and you know, I have to go and do something, tend to something, and, you know, if I don't want to just coat everything with that, you know, lightest color again just to get everything moist again, you can go with something like this and apply color with like a cosmetic brush or something, and it'll apply it in a much lighter fashion than, you know, an absorbent sponge tip like this, which can apply much more ink in a faster period of time, but you know, I really want this to apply nice and smoothly, and I don't want it to be kind of catching and dragging, you know, in a very ungraceful manner on a dry piece of paper. So that's when kind of that, you know, cosmetic brush, you know, really comes in handy. You just kind of tap it down like this. Don't tap it around like this. Kind of, you know, condense your area like this and kind of move it around a little bit. Alright, so that's the process with that. shadows are really getting developed with that dark ink. And as you can see, I hope, that's why I really didn't care too much, about kind of the blending of the different imagery and whatnot. Everything kind of ends up getting going into the blending process with the colors. And I knew this was going to be a fairly dark scene because it's, I wanted it to be a kind of a dark moonlit night scene, so it stands to reason that it would get, reasonably dark. And the use of, the darker blue tones and black would be employed. I really like my edges pretty dark, so I'm trying to get a really good slathering of this black ink around the perimeter. I'll hit somewhere in the shadows right down in here. I even kind of smeared something right down here. I don't remember what it was, but I mean, I could still see it, but it, when I add all these tones down and everything like that, it really doesn't, come into play as far as a prominent kind of I don't know, unintentional mark or undesirable mark. More shading in the background here around this island. Okay. Now, like I said earlier, much earlier, I don't think that we'd see too much hue coming into play, or temperature, or a warm hue, okay? But I think adding a little bit, I even have some some of the ink left in here from my Aurora Borealis scene. So I thought I would add a little bit of it down here into this grassy area, just for a little bit of variation in terms of the temperature range of the piece. Everything right now is looking cool, okay, in terms of the temperature, but maybe we can add in just a slight tinge of warmth, maybe in the form of some warm highlights. When you add an analogous color next to, or analogous colors next to each other, it creates a color glow. So hopefully I can kind of create a subtle color glow in here. And I don't know, it just kind of brings the scene a lot, to life a little bit when you kind of extend your temperature range out. And adding this little green in here too, I mean, it takes it from what could have been kind of more of a really chilly winter scene to, just kind of a, I don't know, could be a spring night or something like that. A very dark one, but you have the moon out there, kind of illuminating things. And plus I want to bring in some wildlife, so it won't hurt to have a little bit of kind of this warmth within the piece. All right. Now, I still have a lot of compositional things that, I could add in here. And I'm still kind of undecided on. Here's this large egret that I was thinking I want to do in here. Have it right down here in the water. And then I have a bunch of other ones too that I wanted to add to the piece. Kind of like a little, I don't know if it's like a bird sanctuary or something like that, but alright, larger things down lower, and smaller, more distant things higher up, okay? So here's this kind of loon, or some kind of landing bird in the water. I'm trying to think how I'll do this from a compositional standpoint. I do want to have plenty of them in there. I want this scene to be like it's like a I don't know what, like a stopping point and a migration, or kind of a resting area. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe this is their destination. There's a couple birds that can go in there. I don't want to go overboard though either, so I'm going to be careful about that. I do have some other ones that can go in the distance, some older ones. Here's some birds in kind of flight going this way. Something like that. And the big choice that I have to make too is, do I do them in VersaFine or do I do them in just regular dye-based ink? I'm not sure. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good as far as from a compositional standpoint. We'll just add one at a time. We'll see, though. Okay, so I really like having some diverse. It's like almost like a skyline. In this case, it's a bunch of trees, but let's add in some additional texture. Okay, this is just called Leafless Pine, and I'll wipe off some of the bottom. Okay, and let's add this into the mix, I think. I think there's a sense of kind of a little bit more of a kind of a realistic depiction of a given setting. If you do have some kind of more aged trees or tree structures in this case, no longer living, but kind of within the given space. Okay, I'm just kind of wiping off the bottom so they kind of transition into the space underneath nice and gracefully. And we'll go with about 4 of them. This one's the small version of it. Okay. They stand out a little bit right now because the ink is wet, but they'll kind of assume the same, transition into the same kind of value as these trees right here, which were also stamped in black. They don't look like it too much anymore, but they are. I'll tell you what, let's go with one more, actually. Let me go with 5 of them for kind of a compositional grace. Kind of an odd number instead of an even number of those. Okay, that is that. I don't remember if this one fits on here or not. Almost. It may be good enough. This one doesn't quite fit on here, but I think it'll fit on there good enough. Put that one about like there, this one about right here. Alright, I need another couple blocks. I could use the same block for the same, for a different thing. I'm just doing this kind of from a composition standpoint. Just trying to work out the placement of these different birds. All right. It's the same one, just on a smaller scale, but I see kind of egrets walking around in a given area all the time. Or herons too. Okay, here's the first one. I don't know how much he'll stand out because this is fairly dark. Maybe I'll move him over here just a touch. Try not to smash its beak too much. I don't want it to look like a platypus or something like that. Okay. Right. I'm going to try to place one of those right in front of the moon. Okay. Well, if we want a drama, I think they're adding drama to the piece. Okay, this bird right here is kind of splashing in the water. Okay. All right. This one I'm going to wait because this one I'm going to do it in VersaFine, which is a really thick, very slow drying black pigmentate. So let's hold on that one because I want to add a lot of additional imagery in here, okay? So let's go about and start doing some of that. Okay, I want some extra rocks in my piece. And I really need an intermediate. I have some extra tack and peel and I have some extra blocks. I need to add that in or apply that tack and peel to some of my images, or blocks, soon. Okay, this is called rocks, rocks and water. So I'm going for some extra imagery in the foreground and in the water. I want to create some additional scale. Okay, so I'm putting these large ones here in the foreground. Like that. This is the smaller version of it. Smaller versions of it I'll mostly use up higher up on the composition. And see, I'm going for additional impressions of it, you know, where they're lighter, as it maybe transitions up there a little bit higher. When you're doing this too, it kind of makes a statement for kind of the depth of the water. But I just like it as a textural standpoint, from a textural standpoint, or and a lighting statement like this, like doing them a little bit lighter. You know, going for those secondary impressions, and that has, you know, it's pretty much related to. See, I can blot this off right here, and we can go for kind of a lighter impression up here. It's kind of related to, or related, not kind of, but to my lessons on value, and, you know, when it comes to distance and lighting. Okay, so kind of a lot of textural things going on in there right now, but okay. Let's go for some additional reeds. I'm going to wipe off the bottom portion of this a little bit so I don't get that too harsh in there. And let me wipe off a little bit just in general. I just want to go for kind of some subtle, kind of darker shapes in here. Is that kind of grass down here? Things tend to get a little bit less kind of defined with all these different inks in here, and sometimes we lose that element of kind of sharpness and crisp. So I like to reintroduce it with the use of imagery like this. So I have blades are kind of specifically rendered to provide types of foreground shapes and imagery to provide depth without kind of obscuring kind of what we've already stamped out in our scenes. So they're airy enough, in other words. And it's kind of the opposite of what's going on in the Sedge fillers, where there's a reverse of that similar type of grassy shape too. So everything's kind of been built to work in conjunction with one another very strategically. Okay, so I'm adding it around in here too. So we have it kind of in the background. I might be just using the top of this now, kind of where it's a little bit more distant. Okay, so I've kind of put some in, oops, sorry. So I've kind of put some in here too, that shape. It's kind of giving everything a little bit more continuity too, by having kind of a similar shape in the background and foreground like that, so everything's kind of coming together a little bit more. And that's, you know, kind of in the spirit of what I was talking about in the beginning about kind of continuity and kind of bringing things together, not really worried about it, you know, worrying about it. From continuity standpoint. Okay, let's see here. I need to take a look here and assess, all right, what's going on. It's kind of really coming together down here. I have this bird still to go, a really big one. I can add some more in here. I tell you what, let me get one of my favorite texture foreground image. Okay, here's this little winter bush right here. I call it winter brush. I'm going to mask off some of this right in here so that it looks like it's coming out of that grass. Okay. Like that. Maybe go for a couple impressions of it. Yeah, okay. Since I use that one, I'll use the smaller version of it too in the distance, like around right in here. Why not? Right up here as well. Okay. Okay, here's these rocks. They're called tiny rocks, small. It's kind of like a textural kind of explosion happening in here. Okay, let's do this one right here. These ones I'm going to just have in the distance. Well, let me see. All of them kind of around in here. Very subtle, textural kind of standpoint, but kind of multi-layer. Let's carry it out. I tend to like that, so from a textural standpoint. So kind of working the values, darker imprints in the darker areas maybe, and maybe some lighter ones in the lighter areas, you know, just to kind of create that transitioning value scheme within that space. I mean, none of these things are like necessary. I'm just kind of testing it out and seeing what happens. You know, when I went for that that winter brush, I just saw those other stamps and I thought, oh, that might work good. All right, I just had it. Where did it go? I had my. I found some of the Lilly. Here's my larger reeds too that can be used here in the foreground. Oh, it was unmounted. This Lilly grass here. Maybe I can put some of that in there as well. Kind of hovering around. This is one of the things, I'm just kind of doing it because I'm kind of getting a kick out of it myself that I can add so much different imagery into the scene, because I'm normally working on card-sized pieces of paper, so I can't add, you know, real, you know, kind of extreme full range of images that can potentially complement certain things, because it would just be kind of too clogged up on a, you know, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of paper. So so this is fun for me, playing around with some different combinations and quantities of certain impressions as well. Okay, I'm going to wipe out the bottom portion of this and just use the top portion just to fit in that little space right there. Okay, I think it's time for the big stamp. My big bird. Is it a gigantic one? No, because it's lower down on the horizon and closer to us, so it's you know, everything kind of goes off in perspective, right? Okay, so let's go with a very dark pad in the form of the VersaFine Instant Dry Pigment Ink Onyx Black. I always forget about that now, I just call it VersaFine Black. I don't know if they have multiple blacks in their line. Okay. And from here on, if I stamp this out right now, I have to be really careful about what I do on the piece, because this is going to remain kind of wet for a while. Okay, I'll put them right here, I think. Okay, don't squish the bill, otherwise it'll look like a platypus or something. We don't want that. But we do want the ink to transfer, so give it an adequate amount of pressure over the whole thing. I tend to hold down a little bit longer with my kind of ladder stamped imagery, because there's a big coating of ink on the paper already, and I don't want it to work like a vacuum where I stamp down and pull it off and it, you know, the ink comes off or remains on the stamp. Okay. Fairly bold, like so, right? Boy, those can look really dramatic. Those bolder kind of shaped images, silhouettes. Don't lose your plastic that comes with your tack and peel. Okay, now we have kind of dead trees in the background like that. Maybe we can add some of it to the foreground. We have these reeds in here, kind of in the foreground, but I can make him even more foreground based by using some kind of larger reeds right down here, and I'll do that in the VersaFine Black again. Okay. diversifying black. Let me go for another one up here. Might want another one over here. Okay. Re-ink. Let me go for a little bit taller, kind of more dense, brushy area right here. I can stand it. Okay. So I went for another couple impressions right down there just to kind of fill that out a little bit more. Okay. Assessment time. What I'm looking for is if there's any areas that I just feel that can use something else, I don't know, some different imagery or whatnot, just to make it look a little bit more full or complete, or just to kind of increase the interest level of a given area. Like, for example, I'm thinking about, I can put in some extra leaves or something like this on the perimeter just to frame things off a bit. It wouldn't be better. I can be really bold and put kind of an overhanging tree limb over the the top here. And that might be interesting. It would kind of bring in the idea of some of these branches. There's kind of both pine and deciduous in there, and that might be pretty interesting. It would be really bold, and maybe that's what I need to be, do. I just need to make it as bold as possible, perhaps, but I'm not sure. It's looking pretty good as is, but I don't think I want to bring anything from the top. I think that would be too high, maybe. But it wouldn't be bad to really bring in some I don't know. We could be standing. We're standing pretty close to this thing, so it wouldn't be bad to have this overhanging kind of a leaf structure in here. Maybe not that one. Yeah, not that one. I do have oak branch as well. That would be an interesting choice. All right, let me go look for a couple images and see. And plus, here's these kind of larger trees right here. I could put one right in here to kind of relate to those ones in the background, or I can even go really bold and put this one right in here. Too busy, I think. I think right up here is the area that, is kind of in question. Okay, this is the oak branch stamp. I've just done an assessment, and I believe that, it could potentially be interesting in here, and again, kind of increase the bold kind of theme of the this piece. So why not? probably go for about 3 impressions of it, just to kind of cap off the top of this. Alright. Doing it in the VersaFine, so it's nice and dark. Very foreground based. I inked up much more than I needed, but I didn't know how much of it I was going to use. I was wondering what's rocking around. My stack of memento pads are rattling. Okay, there. Okay, there's one branch. I'm stamping it upside down because I have more access to it here from this angle. Okay. Kind of capping off the top too from a compositional standpoint, isn't it? Let's go for another one right in here. Over here, no, over here. I'm using more than I thought I was going to because I'm just looking at it. I like what I see, and just the, the very scale of this scene. It can you know, it can take the amount of framing that I'm utilizing here, no problem, just because it's so big. You know, sometimes if I do too much on a quarter-size piece, it's a little bit kind of overwhelming, but just the sheer size of this, it seems like we can kind of use exponentially more imagery without it getting kind of, you know, the piece becoming visually overwhelmed. Okay, so there we have that. But I definitely think that that's probably it. Okay. Oh boy. That is really fun to work at that size. With the amount of ink that I use, it's definitely not fast, but I don't know if this piece really takes any more time than, like, say, I don't know, some of those cards that are like these construction cards with a bunch of different things on them and all matted off and glued and taped and measured and, you know, and whatnot. But, alright, now, I'm not done with this, but I definitely think that it could stand to have a little bit of a pause in terms of the process, because that ink on there, that VersaFine ink on that on the imagery is just so wet right now. So I think I'll give it a little bit of a time just to set up a little bit. It's not going to dry by the time I get back to it, but it'll have a chance to set up just a touch at least, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, I've given this piece about an hour to dry, and it's, I can just see it right here. The that pigment ink is really quite wet. I can see it's still kind of puddled. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah, you can kind of tell. See that? It's like puddled in the leg still. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and add in some of the finer details and little detailing flourishes into the piece, or as much as I can without disturbing, you know, that drying ink right there. So I'll see if I can do it. If I can't, if I start kind of smudging something somewhere, then I'll just discontinue. But I do want to get into it. I don't like having to wait, you know, too long. Although, you know, sometimes I'm on a piece and I'm kind of undecided on where I want to take it. So sometimes kind of stepping away from the piece provides me kind of a good period of time to kind of, I don't know, look at it with fresh eyes when I get back into it, and I'll be able to kind of decipher what needs to be done within the scene. But on this one right here, excuse me, I pretty much know which way I want to go with it, just in terms of a few highlights and whatnot. Okay, now this is a Shuttle Art 0.7 millimeter gel pen. And that's the width of the ball, I guess. But this is a little bit more translucent than the Uniball Signo pen. Okay, this is the Shuttle Art one. This is the Uniball one. The Uniball one will kind of fade out a little bit too as it dries. It tends to dry a little bit darker, or quite a bit darker than what it looks like when it's wet. Okay, but we can use the properties of each one for different things. So what I like to do is on my pieces I like to create some additional lighting and lighting direction and texture. But I like to do some variations of those textures and marks. And let me see if I think I need to zoom in here again. Try to get as close as I can. And I need to create some space. Boy, these scenes are big. 8.5 by 11. Okay, so I'm just going in here and I'm adding in some extra little flourishes on the surface of the water. I can give some kind of highlights here and there. I see kind of those lighter rocks down there, and I'm just kind of giving them a little bit of a highlight on a part of them, giving them some texture. I wish I could go in here and add in some shadows to this area, but this area is pigment ink right down here, so if I add some shadows onto it, it'll smear that pigment ink, you know, because it's not dry yet. I might be able to do something with kind of spray fixative and add that in there, but that would be a good thing to do before I add in this pigment ink. But I mean gel pen, but I don't know. I guess we'll just live without it on this one. But see, what I'm doing here is I'm kind of going into my lighter area I'm adding in some of these highlights down here, okay? Like the water's kind of shimmering, so I kind of build it out from the light or lit area. And I'll kind of space these dots, these little flourishes, farther apart as it moves away from that lighting, okay? So that it kind of transitions from light to dark. It's just the opposite. I would add more shadows in the darker areas, and as it moves away from those shadows, it gets lighter. Okay, that's for shading, but for highlighting, it's kind of working the opposite, but in the same concept. You're just working from, instead of the dark to light, I'm working from the light to dark. And instead of doing it in dark color, I'm doing it in a light color. So that we get these nice transitions. Okay. This is going to give my water a little bit of extra, I don't know, kind of surface texture and texturing, and a little bit more, I don't know, just a little more body and life, I think. Okay, again, this is the shuttle art one, so it's a little more translucent. It's definitely not opaque. Well, I haven't found a... Oops, look at that. See, I got some ink on my finger. Yeah. Focusing right there. And it's from these reeds down here, so I need to be careful. I just kind of touched it and it came off of my finger, so I need to be really careful about that. But these are nice and fun little types of additions to the piece. All right, let me change my exposure a little bit here. Okay. Seems real dark. I don't need to overexpose at all. Okay. There's my little smudgy mark back there. I'll just kind of put some white over the top of it to obscure it a little bit more. Okay, now this image back here is done in dye pasting, so I can kind of go into it and touch it if I need to with the gel pen. I might not be doing too much of this on here. I really have to be careful about not touching any of that pigment ink. Okay, let me try to get in here. A little water surface shimmer. Okay. Now on some of this, not sedge. This was the grassy slope. That's not the name of it, but I'm putting some highlights on that little top side because it's lit. Okay, as well as here. Same thing down here, where kind of light meets dark. I'll add a few little highlights. I'm really close to all this wet pigment ink, so I need to be careful about that, of course. Grassy Bluffs, by the way, back up there. So what you do is you kind of add a little bit more in the lighter area, and then you just taper it off with, kind of spacing it out a little bit. Kind of highlighting some of these rocks down here in the water. Alright, now, here's a light blue one. Since that is our color scheme, I can use that. Where I don't want such a stark, dot, I can always use a colored one. Shuttle art again. It's the multi-pack gives me I don't know, just so many different values of every hue. It really comes in handy for this type of application. Okay, we have this splashing Loon back here. A few little extra splashes into the mix. Highlights on some of that imagery. Okay, now see, this is another little area. It's a little bit more illuminated, but not much, so maybe I can put a little bit of this on there. But not too much, because it's in the shade, but maybe the top side of it is slightly illuminated. See that illumination right there? Some of these deciduous tree limbs right here, you can put a little highlight on some of those. If I kept it fairly light still, not all of them are light though, some of them are very dark. More deciduous trees and some of the branches. Kind of some of the branches kind of that are facing the moonlight. Adding some reflecting light off of the moon, or from the moon. Some of these clouds that are in kind of a darker area, I can put some of this light blue on the top billows, or whatever side billows, if it's facing the light, so it looks like it's reflecting some of that light. Okay, I think we can move into the Uniball. The Uniball one should stand out a lot more. Just in terms of the opacity of it. It's still a little bit more translucent, but not too bad. See some of it down here, kind of splashing around that bird here. And some down here in the water. Maybe up on that ridge. Yeah. Certain little touches here and there. Okay, some of these trees get a little bit lost there. You can add a little bit of a subtle little light reflection on it. Okay, let's go into our clouds now. Okay, clouds that are facing the moon. Put a little bit of a highlight on them. The clouds underneath the moon are top lit. The ones off to the side are side lit, on the side that's facing the moon, of course. And the clouds that are above the moon can be bottom lit. These ones are fairly light, so putting a few highlights might not, you might not be able to see anything, so I might not be doing too much of that. Okay, kind of some subtle little changes there. Subtle, but I think very effective. On a very detailed level, so. Alright, now that is enough. I would add more, in truth, if I could reach in there and if I could put my hand down on the side and just kind of relax it and get into this interior area, but so be it. I can't right now, and I don't see myself, just, doing that in a couple days. I could, but I'm not sure. Okay, this is some Color Box Frost White pigment ink, okay? And I'm putting it onto just a kind of a frayed Q-tip here, okay? It's fairly smashed down on the tip here. And, as you can see, there's a big blob on it like that, okay? We don't want that blob. We want it kind of a much more of a light application of this pigment ink that's really quite similar to paint, you know, to me. It's almost like pigment ink, you know, or paint, rather. Okay? But let's add some of this in to reinforce that lighting in a very soft way as opposed to a very sharp way with the that we did with the gel pens, okay? Start adding it in where light meets dark, so I added in those lighter areas. And then I move it into the neighboring kind of darker area, or darker object, okay? Let's try to zoom in here a little bit. Okay, so see, here's this bird, and you know, it's a little more in the distance. I'll put it in a little bit of fog or mist. Now that fog is being illuminated by the moonlight, and the scene takes on a little bit of a softer kind of appearance, okay? See, it's kind of where light meets dark, and then I kind of taper it a little bit. I put more in the light area, and then I kind of lightly dab off, you know, off into the darker areas. Okay, so it kind of tapers it. Lighter in light, more in the light, less in the dark. I have some videos that are dedicated just to doing this type of application, but basically the main point that I'm saying in it is to really take off a lot of ink. People just used way too much ink on their tip here. You want it to where there's so little ink on your tip. Now that was a little bit more because I'm adding it into a very light area, but everyone just uses way too much ink on there. You want it to where even a few taps, light taps, because that's, you know, unless you want to get a big glob on there, like I just did there, but I don't want that much. You just want to barely be applying the ink with each tap, okay? So less ink, very light tapping, and just kind of methodically adding in as much as you want, okay? In a very kind of gradual manner. When it takes longer to apply it because it requires more taps, it means you have a lot more control over how much you're applying. And you can kind of see things develop, and you can apply it accordingly. you know, so the more lengthy the process, the more control you have, right? Anyways, that's the way that works for me. I'm sure someone else can do it, you know, with like much more of like a, you know, big swash expressionistic approach, and you know, you can probably do it like that, but I find this methodology much more of a controlled type of application. Anyways, you see that kind of mistier type of look starting to come about. See that down there? And around here, here. Okay, and it looks great up in the cloud areas. Okay. Let's really soften some of the cloud and make it look really, I don't know, maybe kind of three-dimensional and textured and glowing, I guess, really, more than anything. I need to be careful about these trees here because they're done in that versifying pigment ink. And remember, where are we adding this? We're adding it into the lighter areas, the places that we've retained some of the light. Okay, so maybe around the moon like this. Let's get the moon look like it's glowing. I can put some of this over my birds as well, like some of the birds are kind of glowing, you know. Reflecting some of that moonlight. Like that. Okay. Kind of trying to emphasize that kind of glowing, you know, corona-ish type of aspect of that lighting, sky lighting. Okay. Strange for me to just not be able to grab this thing anywhere. It's just that it's so wet. Okay. Let's take a look at this moon, around the moon. Can you see where it kind of those softer applications or softer touches are right in here. Let's take a look in here and see that. That's the pigment ink working. The image itself has a kind of a soft look to it, but this is just going in there and just kind of emphasizing some of that area. But you have to retain some of the lighter areas. You know, a few touches here and there of the white of the paper, otherwise the white pigment ink just looks out of place, okay? So that's why we have to be a little bit more selective with our darker color applications so that we can retain some of that white for white kind of embellishments like this. So hopefully that looks nice and kind of deep. I might put a little bit across that moon. See, there's that little band of kind of clouds in front of the moon. We'll kind of subdue those a little bit. And add a nice kind of atmospheric kind of mist into the mix right around in here. Now this will look really good in front of this area right in here too, but I would have to wait for it to dry, which maybe I'll do, and then I'll spray seal it. And then once all that ink is spray sealed in, I could potentially add some of this type of effect, or I can add a little bit of shading, you know, around in here as well. But not now. Right now, one of the things I always mention is pigment ink always dries a little bit darker than what it looks like when it's been freshly applied. Okay, so it's going to get darker because it doesn't darken itself, but it just gets a little bit more translucent, and the color underneath will show through. Kind of tapping some over these trees, making the tree look a little bit more dimensional, maybe. Alright. This is a 10-point thickness paper. It'd be nice if I had 12 because it won't bow on me. I mean, I can just counter bend it here, but it's kind of nice if you don't have to do that. But I bought a lot of 10-point thickness paper at one time, so kind of stuck with it, but my next batch will definitely be at a 12-point. Okay, I think that is it for right now. Hopefully it looks like a fairly dramatic scene. Maybe not as much as a couple of my previous ones. Maybe this is more serene, but I don't know, kind of maybe some drama in the serenity, perhaps. I don't know. But anyways, this is an 8.5 by 11 again, and this dimension here really affords me the ability to try out some new compositions and usages of some existing stamps within, you know, one composition, be it, you know, used in repetition, such as these Sedge clusters or something like that. The number of images used certainly, like, you know, a lot of the repetitive forms of the oak branch up here, certainly of the cloud. I mean, I used a lot of different cloud impressions off that same stamp. And just being able to go in, we have, you know, 5 different areas of wildlife in here. kind of adding to that theme. And even though there's, there's 4 of them in here, 4 different impressions, but up here we have, what, 2, 4, 6 geese. Maybe I should add some more in the distance, I don't know. I don't know, I don't feel that the piece is really, what's the word I'm looking, crowded, okay? I think it looks fairly balanced and calm and not too overly busy, okay? I mean, if I look at, concentrate on areas, very close up, there's a lot of things going on in them. But I think overall, I think it looks, what I'm hoping for is, somewhat serene, a sense of serenity, and especially with this type of imagery and composition and color scheme. So, but hopefully at the same time it conveys, somewhat of a sense of drama within the piece. So, okay. My last 8.5 by 11, I think, for the week at least. But I don't know. I'm kind of I've done these before, but with these last 3 pieces, it's really kind of I don't know, getting me to kind of reconsider maybe the amount of these full-size pieces that I'll do, in terms of the ratio of a quarter page to the half page. Maybe I need to get to a full page once a month or something like that, because I really enjoy the playing around with the space on here, and I don't know, that's it opens up some new possibilities. So, okay, thanks so much for tuning in, and if you've bared with me to the end, thanks so much for your tolerance and endurance. Okay.